Moving on to item number 4, urban level protection, or the ULOP, Senate Bill 5. Once again, Arnaldo Rodriguez, our Development Services Director, will be taking us through this item.
Thank you, Mayor. The item before you is a compilation of 6 interrelated bills passed by the state of California. They're commonly referred to as ULOP, and then also Senate Bill number 5. The Senate bills themselves are actually Senate Bills 517, and then 4 different Assembly bills, 570, 162, and 156. Collectively, those are often referred to as Senate Bill number 5. What Senate Bill 5 required was that all communities in the San Joaquin and the Sacramento Valley prepare plans for flood protection. So again, and this actually applies not only to the city of Yuba City, but it applies to all cities within the San Joaquin Valley and the Sacramento Valley, which collectively I think make up about 14 counties if I counted correctly. So overall, the purposes of the ULOP plan is to reduce flood exposure through the city's land use planning and zoning authority. So in terms of how this applies to us, this actually does require that the city of Yuba City amend its general plan that would regulate urban development in 100 and 200-year floodplains for properties that have the potential to flood to depths greater than 3 feet. If it does not flood to depths greater than 3 feet, then the ULOP findings, which we'll talk a little further, do not apply. So again, this plan itself is proposing to regulate specific types of developments that can take place, and also outlines the conditions that would have to be met in order for development to continue. So the actual definition of ULOP, again, it's defined as a level of protection that is necessary to withstand flooding that has a 1 in 200-year chance of occurring in any given year using criteria consistent with or developed by the California Department of Water Resources, which is responsible for flooding in the state. So in terms of impacts to Yuba City and how this affects us, this does mandate that we amend our general plan. And for the people in the audience this evening, what the general plan is, it's a long-term vision that every city and every county in the state of California have. Our general plan was adopted in 1994, and what it does, it simply outlines the vision. It's more of a blueprint. It doesn't fully describe the timing of development. However, it does describe what the ultimate development is going to look like in the city of Yuba City. It also requires that we amend our zoning code. We also prepared an environmental assessment, and the plan itself actually applies citywide. However, although it technically does apply to citywide, the vast majority of the city of Yuba City is actually outside of the flood zone, and I'll actually show you a map here. So although again it applies citywide, the actual true application of it, it's a relatively small area, which I'll point to. So the red line is the city sphere of influence. The dashed line is existing city limit lines, which is about 14 to 15 square miles. The rest of the area, which is largely in the southwest quadrant of our community, there's a very small corner, which I'm pointing to right there, and along the Gilsizer or Slough, that this would actually apply to. So again, although it's citywide, the actual parts that it truly does impact would potentially be, again, the southwest quadrant of the community and along the Gilsizer or Slough. This map itself, it's highlighting what areas would be anticipated to flood should there be a breach along the Feather River, whereas this map shows what areas could potentially flood in the event of the Sutter Bypass breaching in the 200-year flood plain. And then also, if you can tell that the area itself is slightly smaller, so the impacted area would be smaller should the Sutter Bypass River actually breach. So in terms of what kind of projects this applies to, so it largely applies to any type of discretionary permit. So largely any use permit, any subdivision map. So for hypothetically, if a property owner were to come into the city and say, I have 10 acres and I would like to subdivide that and I'd like to build 100 homes on my 10 acres, we would have to make the ULOP findings again if it happens to be in one of the highlighted areas, which again, the vast majority of the city does not fall within that area. If someone were to come in and they have a lot and they wanted to build a single family home and they're within one of those designated areas, we would also have to make the ULOT findings. And then also if we ever into a development agreement, and what a development agreement is, it's basically an agreement between the city and a private developer that outlines a long-term vision for their properties. Those are usually for very large projects. For example, a brand new shopping mall would be an excellent candidate for development agreement. So in terms of the enormous packet that the City Council received and that was placed on our website, in terms of the plan amendment, we are proposing modifications to Chapter 3 of our general plan, which simply outlines that the city has to update or review the map every year to make sure that we're consistent with the latest information. Chapter 8 would mandate that the city coordinate with Sutter County to make sure that we're all using the same information. And also some additional modifications to Chapter 9, including the maps that I just showed. In terms of the zoning code update, we have added some language that, again, that outlines when the ULOT findings have to be made and what those ULOT findings actually are. So, with that being said, City staff and the Planning Commission are recommending to the City Council approval of the negative declaration and the General Plan 16-03 to amend the City's General Plan. We'd also like to introduce and waive the first reading of the amendments to the Yuba City Municipal Code, which would be returned back to at the Council's next meeting on September the 20th for formal action. That concludes staff's presentation.
Any questions from Council of Mr. Rodriguez?
Mr. Mayor, I just would like for Mr. Rodriguez to provide one clarification. Would you please go back to the map that shows the flood areas? Realizing that some areas that are affected by the blue, which is the inundation of water, let's just pick that area. Some areas can be padded up and therefore are still developable. Would you explain if any of those areas apply to that blue area and what areas may not be developable within that?
There are a couple of points. So hypothetically, this lighter blue area, which is a relatively small area, relatively speaking to the city as a whole, it's expected to flood between 5 and 10 feet. And the city manager, Krager, stated that does not indicate that you cannot develop there. It simply means that if you were to develop there, more than likely you'd have to build the pad for the home up, or you probably have to basically build a large irrigation base or some kind of temporary ponding basin in that area. Is it challenging? Absolutely. It could potentially be cost effective, but those are items as the city grows to the south and to the west, as different property owners are coming into the city, those are different things that we'll have to take a look at. And really at that point, it's largely going to be a partnership between the city, Sabufka, Sutter County, and the developer to make sure that we're coming up with a plan that meets all of the different ULOT findings. So again, impossible? Absolutely not. Could it pose some challenges? More than likely it will. However, I think a lot of people are very well aware of that. And then also, if you take a look at the Gilsizer Slough, which is just south of the city of Yuba City, the highlighted area is the portion that the city is currently contemplating potentially expanding the sphere of influence, and we're in the process of preparing an environmental impact report. The project proponents are very well aware of that, and they're actually working very closely with the city and our EIR consultant to identify alternatives to make sure that the ULOT findings can be made.
So, Arnaldo, with the Gilsizer Slough area, is there a way to enclose that in the future and then through pumping sources and everything else meet a 200-year flood protection level for that area?
I'm going to defer that to our Public Works Director, Dan Langley, who's probably who can better answer that.
It would be very cost prohibitive to try to enclose Gilsizer Slough, particularly down in that section where it's a wide open channel. The proponent for the proposed sphere expansion is actually talking about building large detention basins and then using that soil to build up the adjacent pads to build up out of the floodplain.
Okay, thank you very much. Any other questions of staff before I open this to the public? Seeing none of y'all stepping forward, we're going to leave this to the public, open this to a public hearing, Any member from the public that wishes to speak to this item may do so by going over to the podium. It looks like Fotine is headed in that direction currently. She passed the exit door, so that's where she's going.
Well, I'm curious. So, once again, Mayor and Council, question in regards to this, Arnaldo. We saw the slide with the Sutter Buttes, or the Sutter bypass and the Feather River levee, or the breach. What happens if they both go at the same time? No, I mean, it's something to think about, right? So,
It appears the answer is going to be being provided by Diana Langley.
What really controls the elevation of the water surface is the height of the levee downstream. So if you had a breach at both locations, basically the water's going to fill up, this area would fill up kind of like a bathtub until the water surface elevation gets to a point that it spills over the levee. One of the things that Cibivka is working on is a relief cut plan that if you had that situation, you would go in and cut a section of the levee down at the south end of the basin to allow the water to spill out over into the Sutter bypass to then drain the area. And so if it were to happen that you had a breach on both locations, there would be a slight difference in this map, but it's not much, only because it's controlled by the height of the levee.
I think a good example too, Diana, was the 1997 breach into the Meridian Basin, in which the water built up from the south north, and there was a last-minute fight by the federal government to help place a levee around the small town of Meridian, as it took probably 5 to 6 days for the water to even reach the outskirts of Meridian. But that was a much smaller area, and the water flows were fairly high at that time. In fact, they were at record levels at that time.
Mm-hmm.
Any other members from the public wish to speak to this? Seeing none, we'll close the public hearing, bring it back to council for action.
Mr. Mayor, I'll go ahead and make a recommendation to approve A, B, C, and D.
I'll second that.
We have a motion and a second. All those in favor signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Thank you very much. And as running with the theme,